Okay guys, welcome back to the iOS tutorial. And last time we discussed lists and we discussed some other for loops. Today we're going to talk about classes. And we're going to talk about also commenting code, and we're also going to talk about briefly about optionals, which is everything that we need so far in order to start our to-do list. So let's go ahead and remove everything here, and we're gonna talk about classes. In order to talk about classes, I'm gonna go ahead and bring out my thing. So I'll go ahead and delete that, and we're gonna draw some stuff. All right. So let's see. Alright, so let me go ahead and pick the tool here, create a new layer. Probably best in order for us to draw this. Alright, so what classes are is, let's say you have a house, right? You have a house, and the house has windows. It has a door, right? And the house has a color. It has a color. It has each as a door, right? It's a door, and it has windows, and it has a list of windows, right? Remember we talked about list of windows. And now we want to be able to talk about classes, right? So we have a class. So we create a class. It's called this a kind of blueprint of this house, and we're going to call it a house. And in this house, we have a color, we have a door, and we have list of windows, right? And those are properties of this class. The door is a property of the class, list is a property, so they belong to the class. So whatever happens to, like if I have the door, it's inside this class, it's part of this class, so it will change. If the door color changes, the whole class is it's class bound. So what class is there's something called OOP. So let me go ahead and delete this, create a new one. Alright, so what we have in OOP is, it's like OOP, it's called Object Oriented Programming. So what we do is we program objects. So you saw the house. Let's say you have a cat, and a cat has a color. How many cat is basically you know, the type of cat, right? Persian cat or something like that. So those are properties of the class cat. Cat is a class, it's a blueprint, and it has everything that the cat has. And then another thing we can do is, in OOPs there's something called inheritance. What that means is that if I have another cat, a cat is a mammal, right? And mammals all have 4 legs. So since cat is a mammal, it inherits from the mammal class. So it basically says, okay, this is my parent. It's my parent, and I inherit all those traits that I have as a mammal. So because cat is a mammal, we are mammals too. So we could be part of this thing. Humans too. You know. So that's kind of another thing with classes is I'm going to discuss with you is let's see, file new. Okay, so another thing with classes is that, let me create this first. Another thing with classes is, so classes have actions, right? So you have action, so you do an action on a class. So you do something with the classes. You say, okay, if it's a car class, right? Start the car. You're doing a method, an action, remember functions, and then we have properties, and then there's another thing called in OOP called private and protected and public. So what public means is, let's say we have two classes, right? And whenever you declare a property, you declare either public or private. So what that means is anybody that inherits from the class. Let's say I say I have a car and I want to inherit from that car. I'm going to say it's a Porsche, but it's a car, right? So inherit from the car. But if I say that the properties is public, I can also access all the properties from the car. But if I say private, so that means it belongs private to that class and nobody else can see it. That's what private means. And there's also something in Swift called open. And it's open means like basically it's open to everybody inside that library, inside that app. And then private is private. So it's private only to that class. Nobody else can see it. And that's it. And then there's also protected. Protected means that only classes that are inherited from it. So if class is inherited, then it can see that that class. So those are the classes, and then let's go ahead and new layer. Alright, so those are classes, and another thing with classes is there's something called, so there's inheritance, we did, there's something called composition. So inheritance, remember we said we have the house, and then we have like a style of a house, let's say, right? We inherit from house. But if we have a composition, because inheritance, you don't want to do it because it has too much dependency. Imagine this one inherits from this inherits, and it becomes real messy. So composition means that this house has another class reference. So basically, so if I have a style modern house, right? So this class house has modern house. So then I can talk to modern house inside the house. I don't need to like inherit its properties. So it does get pretty complicated, but this is like almost like just a brief overview of it. But we're gonna definitely talk about it more in the future. So I think this is all you need to know so far for classes. So let's go back to Xcode and minimize this. So go ahead and create a class. So we can create a class inside playgrounds. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay. So we say class. Remember we say house, and then we can have class. We can have a class called the modern house. Inherit. Whenever you inherit, you put a colon, and you say house. So now I have house. Remember we said private and public. So we say private. I want everything that, maybe I want a house color to be private to this. or maybe the, oh no, architecture, right? Architecture. It's just basically, I would say an architecture type maybe, right? And that's a string. And I want it to be private, but I wanted something to be public. Okay, we have to denote everything with var or let, but I don't want anybody to change it, so I put let. And if I put let, I have to say that none, whatever. And if I say public here, and so public here, and basically public let, I'm gonna say windows, and it's an array of windows, right? List of windows. So I'm gonna say it's an array of. So I could have another class of windows, but I'm gonna say just string for now. And there's something that in thing we didn't discuss is to initialize a class. There's something called initialization. So remember, it's not saying class has no initializers, because that means saying, okay, you're creating a class, but you're not giving it an initial value. So in order to do that, there's something called constructor. A constructor, what it does is it creates the class. It's kind of like a builder. So it's initializing the class, and this is an init. So now I have the class initialized, and it's not going to complain anymore. And I'm going to say, okay, it's saying return initializer without initializing. So I'm not initializing these properties. So remember, the class, it's a class and it has the properties. So now I need to initialize the properties, or I can say, so now we're going to talk about optionals. Optionals means that if I put a question mark here, it doesn't have a value. And I could do that with the same thing here. Say, I don't know what the value is, so don't tell me anything. So you know, now the initializer is not gonna it's not gonna tell me that I need to initialize it, because now I'm telling it, hey, it's nothing, don't worry about it. So I'm gonna go ahead and say var, because it's gonna change. So the reason I say var is because now I told it initially I don't have any value. Initially I don't know any value, so question mark tells me I don't know if it has a value or not. I don't know it. But then in order to get the value out of it, there's something in Swift called unwrapping optional. So we were unwrapping it. In order to unwrap something, you say if let, and then we say window, right? It doesn't matter what you say the first name, but you can say if the window equals windows, and then this window right here is unwrapped now. So you're unwrapped if you say if let. But if I want to do another one, and I just can put a comma and say let architecture type, I can say anything here when I'm unwrapping it, architect, and then architecture type. Right. So now I can access both of them inside here, and they're unwrapped. They don't have that question mark. You can see like the question mark has disappeared. So on the architect and the window, if I say window, before it was at a question mark when I thought. So because what's happening is saying if the window has a type, right? I'm saying if the window has a value, then unwrap it. Otherwise, don't unwrap it and don't worry about it. Don't do anything. But I can say, okay, the windows do. I'm gonna initialize the windows here. I'm gonna say, okay, the windows is a window 1 and then window 2. And then I'm gonna also initialize the architecture type, modern or something like that, right? And now it's gonna actually, so if I say to print the window and print the architect, it's gonna print both those two. But if I were to not say that, so let's go ahead and just, okay, in order to call this class now and call its variables, so I'm gonna actually initialize a house here. Let's say let house equals house, and then when I open parentheses and close this, that means I'm calling the constructor, I'm calling the initializer. And it's calling this line 13 and it's calling the line 14, so it's setting all the windows and it's setting the architecture type, and it's gonna unwrap it now, because before I said it doesn't have a value with the question mark. So now it's gonna say print this. It's gonna do both of them. So if I go to run that, you got window 1, see? You got window 1, window 2, and modern. But if I don't set any value, so this is the reason we have this if let, is if there's no value, it won't crash the app. So it's not gonna say anything, because it's gonna skip all this. Another way to the if let, if you have a lot of if lets, another thing Swift created is this guard. So you say guard let, and then you say window equals windows, right? But what with guard let is you have to put else, because otherwise, so it's saying if this has a value, go ahead unwrap it. Otherwise, go ahead and return it. So if you're unwrapping it, only show it outside. So this window is gonna be okay outside. It's gonna be unwrapped outside. But if it goes inside this curly bracket, then it's a no value. So it's saying guard let window equals window, otherwise return. See, if this window doesn't have a value, go ahead and return it out of it. But unwrap it outside of the curly braces. So this is good if you wanna, you can actually do the same thing here and say architect let architect, just like that, architect equals to architecture type. So now we don't need this if let, and it's cleaner. So now we don't need to go inside this curly brace to access those variables. So all we can do is print them once we know we have the value, right? Print window and print architect. So actually it's not gonna print it, right? Because we didn't set any value. So go ahead, so if you were to print it, no value. Okay, another thing that you don't want to do is not have this, right? So let's say we don't have this and we print this, and what happens? It says unsolved window, and so I want to print windows, and I want to print architecture type. I don't care. I'm not gonna use guard. Okay, so go ahead and run it, and it says nil. It's a nil value. But if I were to unwrap it like this, so what this bang sign means is force it. Doesn't matter if it doesn't have a value. Force it, but it's gonna crash if it doesn't have a value. And it's crashing. Found nil, unwrap it, so that's an crash, because you're telling it to get the value even though it doesn't have a value. So never use this on force unwrap. Try to never ever use it. Always use guard let, so you protect the value and you don't crash the system. So right now it won't call those print, those two it won't call the line 16 and line 17 because I don't have an initialized value. So let me initialize the value on architect type. I'm gonna say modern, and I'm gonna put windows. I'm gonna put some windows in there. Window 1, window 2, and I'm gonna go ahead and print it now, right? And it's okay now because I filled it up and I have a value now for both architect type and windows. So now I won't go inside the guard and I won't return out of this initializer. So this again, remember we said the private and public. So modern house also needs an initializer, right? But I can call the super init. So what I'm calling the init of the house, and it needs to override, because I'm overriding this init right here, and I'm calling super init. So it's actually calling this guy. So if I were to say print, nothing will change. But if I were to say print, if I were to do this, if I say modern house, what do you think will happen? I'm calling the constructor of modern house, and that one is calling the init of the house. It's going to be the same, right? Because it's calling here, right? So what's happening? It's coming here to initializer. It's saying, okay, first call the initializer of my superclass. But can I access the variable of the superclass? Can I do that? Let me see. Super dot. Oh, I can access the windows, right? Remember, because we said the windows is public, and we can also access the nothing else, because nothing else is public. This is not public either. So whenever you don't have anything next to it, it's actually the initializer is okay. The initializer is public. But if I have like let's say func test, can I access that? Let's see if I can access it. Super test. Yeah, I can access it because it's by default everything is public. But if I say private, now I can't access it. It's gonna say protection level is private. Test is inaccessible due to protection level. So that's what protection. So but what if I say protected? Right? Remember we studied protected. Okay, there's no protected in Swift. I messed up because I was like thinking about. So there's open and closed. Open will open it to every class. So open architecture. Yeah. But if it's closed, you can do closed. There's no close. It's only open and private, public. That's what I remember. Okay. So if you don't denote the type, the accessor type, which is public, private, and open, it's gonna be actually public. So what I can also do with classes now, I can go ahead and call the. I can say house dot architecture because I'm inheriting from the house, because now I'm inheriting from all this architecture, and I also have my own thing, and I say var, I have a color, UI color, and I don't know what the color is. I'm gonna set the color while I'm gonna say red, and now I can go ahead and say house as color. So I'm actually accessing my own, the modern house color, but I don't have a, if I were to have a color here, the same color here, which color do you think it will access? Cannot override, because now I'm trying to override this color. It's saying cannot override with store property color. You can't override because we already have color, so we just set it to red and self before super in it. So we need to set this after color equals red. So it's inheriting from its superclass, and you don't need to say super anymore, because all you can say anything that you inherit public, I can say architecture type, and this one is modern, right? So that's kind of what classes are, and we're done with talking about classes.